They were the greatest soldiers in Italy. They won every battle, and the moment the war was over, their employers had them executed. Well, not because they had done anything wrong, but because they had done everything right and they were no longer needed. And a man who is no longer needed is a man who can be disposed of. The famous mercenaries of Renaissance Italy protected entire cities only to find themselves executed the next day because they were seen as disposable, as something that could be replaced, and being able to be replaced by younger and cheaper soldiers. They confused being valuable with being indispensable. Those two are not the same thing, and this is Law 11. The story is of the Italian mercenaries, the condottieri, were the most skilled military forces in the 15th century of Europe. Cities hired them to fight wars. They won magnificently, decisively, and then the cities calculated something cold. After heroic services, many of the great military leaders of Renaissance Italy were surprised to end up imprisoned or executed. They made themselves useful, but they had not made themselves necessary. The moment their usefulness ended, so did their protection and their reward. They never made their employers afraid of what would happen without them. Now compare the story of Italian mercenaries to the Ottoman Bismarck. Bismarck understood this law so completely that he spent his entire career engineering dependency rather than simply performing well. Bismarck deliberately formed alliances with people who had only a tenuous hold on power, weak rulers who needed him desperately. He served two weak Prussian kings, Frederick and his brother William. Both needed him. Both ceded authority to him and did whatever he told them to do, because he made clear that if they didn't, he would leave them in the lurch. They didn't just serve the king, they became the king's spine. They became dependent on Ottoman, and like creeping ivy, Bismarck wrapped himself around the source of power so completely that it would have caused great trauma to cut him away. And those Italian mercenaries, they were excellent soldiers, but Bismarck was irreplaceable. One group was executed, the other one became the chancellor of a unified Germany. And then you could say there's this king of this law who is Henry Kissinger. Kissinger made himself indispensable to Nixon by monopolizing diplomatic channels and expertise, ensuring his position regardless of policy disagreement. Nixon and Kissinger did not get along well. They had some discrepancies, and that is a documented history. But Nixon resented Kissinger's intellectual arrogance. Kissinger had a little personal warmth for the president. None of that mattered. Kissinger survived the many bloodlettings that went on in the Nixon White House not because he was the best diplomat Nixon could ever find, and not because the two men got along. He survived because he had made himself the only person who held certain relationships, who held certain diplomatic relationship with some certain specified countries, certain back channels, certain pieces of knowledge that nobody else in that administration had possessed, and only Kissinger did. So firing Kissinger would have meant losing access to things Nixon could not replace. So Nixon kept him, and even when he didn't want it to, they still kept him. That is the precise goal of this law. You don't have to be liked, you don't have to be admired, you don't even have to be the best, but you have to be someone they cannot afford to lose or replace. This is Law 11 of the 48 Laws of Power. Learn to keep people dependent on you. To maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people depend on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they can do without you. Green adds a distinction here that the most people here miss. People often think that being powerful means being independent, but power requires relationships with allies, superiors, and even enemies. And a completely independent person has freedom but not power. When others are dependent on you, however, you are a little bit dependent on themselves, but you have the leverage or the upper hand depending on the situation, and you have the independence to pursue your goals. Independence and power are not the same thing. In fact, they are the complete opposites. The person who needs nobody controls nobody, and the person who makes themselves needed by the right people controls everything those people touch. And this law operates in every workplace, in every relationship, in every industry on earth right now today. The employee who documents every process so clearly that anyone could replace them. That one friend who introduces his mates to a new friend circle, and he is no longer a mediator, he is no longer the connector between his friend circle and his previous friends. So they no longer text him, they no longer reach out to him. And the expert who teaches everything they know has just created their own competition. Make yourself so indispensable that your superior is afraid to tempt fate and find out what would their life be without you. The most secure people in any organization are never the most talented. They are the ones whose departure would cause the most damage. The Italian mercenaries were talented. Kissinger was dangerous to lose. One ended in a prison cell, the other shaped the foreign policy of the most powerful nation on earth for a decade. The difference here was never the ability. The difference here was necessity. That was Law 11. Tomorrow, Law 12, about the single most disarming move you can make against anyone who suspects you, doubts you, or stands in your way. One act of honesty. Thank you.